Nancy Steck, and I'm with the New Jersey Lawyers Assistance Program. Just wanted to do some housekeeping before we introduce our speakers. And just know that you as participants will be muted throughout the session, but we do have a Q&A at the end of the session, and you're invited to submit questions in the Q&A area of the Zoom box, which you should be able to see that on your screen. We'll be managing those and offering those to Shari to address at the end of her presentation. If you're encountering any technical difficulties during this presentation, sorry, we probably can't help you with those. You may try dealing with Zoom, or better yet, if you miss the presentation, we are recording it, and the recording will be made available on New Jersey Lawyers Assistance Program YouTube channel. You can find that by going to our website, njlap.org. And I would encourage you to please subscribe. It's a new venture for us, so help us get our subscription rate up and subscribe to our channel. Everything that we've done this week has been recorded and can be found there if you missed anything. There's also in your link to this webinar today, there is access to I don't know if it's a download or a PDF, I'm not sure, but there's an access to an article that Shari has nicely prepared for you. In lieu of doing a PowerPoint today, she's just going to talk, and any information that would be additional follow-up for her will be in that download, so that's available to you as well. And at the end of our presentation today, I would invite you all to stay around for Shane Scott, who has been with us all week, doing a guided meditation at the end of the presentation, which has been a lovely way to transition from virtual world to whatever reality we're going off to. So please stay around for that, and I'll be introducing her later as well. Before we get started with the presentation, I do want to acknowledge the joint effort of the Bar Association Special Committee on Lawyer Wellbeing, the Young Lawyers Division, and New Jersey Lawyers Assistance for putting this week together. It was a delight to work with you all, and I look forward to future collaborations. Welcome to today's presentation, Caring for Ourselves and Each Other When Faced with Secondary Trauma, which is being presented by Shari Pearlman, who is the Assistant Director and Attorney Counselor with the Oregon Attorney Assistance Program. Shari is a graduate of Wurzweiler School of Social Work, Rutgers School of Law, Camden, and she's received her certificate in business management from Portland State University, as well as her license in clinical social work in 2010. She is experienced in career and life transition counseling, mental health and trauma counseling, crisis intervention, alcohol and substance misuse counseling, and relationship counseling. She worked in indigent criminal defense in Portland for 4 years before joining the Oregon Attorney Assistance Program staff in 1999. Shari was the OAAP liaison to the Oregon State Bar Advisory Committee on Diversity and Inclusion, and served on the boards of the Oregon Women Lawyers, Queens Bench, and the OSB Diversity Section Executive Board. Shari has a passion for helping people and building community, and she does both of those wonderfully. Shari, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nancy. And thank you, Nancy and Noreen, for putting this together. I think it's wonderful. Last night, Bill Kane from the New Jersey Lawyer Assistance Program called me, and I was reminded of how much it is important to be a part of a community of assistance programs around the country, excuse me. And to the audience, I hope that you all have communities of people that you can count on, because during this time when many of us are working remotely and many of us haven't left our neighborhoods even, it is really nice to be able to reach out to people near and far and feel like we are a part of something, as opposed to just being in our own little worlds, because our worlds can get very small. And though there might have been a novelty for all of us when we started working remotely, for some people it has worn on them, and I acknowledge that. There are days when I just want to go to the beach, and I have not been able to. There are days when I just want to hang out with my colleagues, and the only way to do that is by Zoom. And there are days when I am loving being at home with my dogs. So I think there are pluses and minuses. And I want to include some of that as I'm talking about my topic today, because I want it to be relevant. And I know it's important to be relevant. And in Oregon, we've been working on Lawyer Wellbeing Week as well. And I'm pleased to have the opportunity to talk to all of you. And I was looking at your curriculum, and I don't know who attended, but I know that you talked about building resilience, mindfulness, and Nancy did a body scan for like 20 minutes with people to help them learn how to relax, and that you had a session on time and stress management already. And so I appreciate that. And some of my stuff might repeat some of that, but hopefully it's in a different context, and hopefully some of my materials will be useful to you. Nancy pointed out that there are materials, and there's an outline that I will basically be following, and there's also a few handouts. And I've given you the ABA's Wellness Task Force definition of well-being, which shows 7 dimensions of wellness. I've given you a self-care inventory, and I've given you a document that the OAP has put together. Actually, Doug Quaren and Kira Hazilla have put together, which is 25 tips that are evidence-based to be well and manage your stress. And all of those tips come with links that are currently working. So if you find yourself wanting to find a new way to take care of yourself during this time, you might want to wander through the 25 tips. I think they're great. I didn't create them, but I use them all the time. So back to my topic. So how do we take care of ourselves, and why is this relevant to us? Why is talking about trauma relevant to lawyers? And I think what we like to think of ourselves as are the heroes or the helpers or the people who have the answers. We're the go-to people. And so we like to be the people who stay up in our brains, and we like to be the people that figure things out, and it's comforting to be that person. And even if you don't have the answer on the spot, we all know how to research, and we all know how to take care. And so it doesn't seem right that we should be impacted by other people and the experiences that they have. But as you know, we are, and we can be. And I'm just briefly, I'm sure you know this by now, but stress, when you think about it, is something that we encounter every day. And, you know, a little bit of stress is your alarm clock goes off, or the sun comes out, or your dog barks in my case, and boom, you know, that's what motivates you to get out of bed. But because we're made of hormones and we're like chemical soup, if we have too much stress hormones coursing through our veins, it is going to negatively impact us over time. And we're going to look at that a little bit today. The hormones that get released when we are responding to an actual threat or a perceived threat, like cortisol, are the hormones that allow our body to flee, fight, or freeze or shut down, okay? And those hormones are very effective to doing those things, but they are not effective in allowing us to relax, sleep, eat, reproduce, and more importantly, think on the higher level that we want to think in. And so we need to modify, monitor, notice, and take care when the stress is getting to us. Now, stress on steroids is really trauma when you think about it. Trauma is, as defined by the Center for Treatment of Anxiety and Mood Disorders, is a psychological, emotional response to an event or experience that might be deeply disturbing or distressing. And so when somebody has experienced one trauma, maybe a car accident, or somebody has had repeated experiences of trauma, maybe some of you are immigration lawyers and you're working with clients who have lived in a war zone, and every day something is happening to that person while they're there, and then they leave the country, and their body and their brain has been used to going into that fight or flight mode constantly, to the point where they are easily hyper vigilant, and they have experienced so much of the stress and so much of those hormones, and it is impacting them. And so when you're meeting with somebody, and even if you are not in a practice area that would expose you to someone's trauma, like an immigration lawyer, but when you're meeting with somebody, we don't know if they have experienced some form of trauma. We may not know that. It may, you might be meeting with them for a will, you might be meeting with them on a corporate level, you don't know. But if that person is feeling badly, or if that person starts talking to you about a trauma, you might feel it. You might feel it in your body, you might feel it in your gut, you might start to be anxious yourself. All of us have experienced some of that sometimes. Someone's telling you a story about something that's scary, and you start to get scared. That is a normal human reaction. And I would like us to look at that, and that reaction comes from something in our brains and something in our bodies called mirror neurons. So I have a little video that I like to show to help us understand how we can experience someone else's trauma.
Let me take you back to the early 1990s. Sleepy little laboratory in Parma, Italy, and scientists had a MRI brain scanning machine on a macaque monkey as the macaque monkey was trying to open up a nut. They wanted to see how the neurons would light up. So the monkey's trying to open up the nut, the neurons light up, and just by serendipity, and this is how science sometimes happens, a human being walked into the laboratory. I don't know if it was by mistake, and he was hungry. He saw the nuts and opened up one of the nuts and tried to crack it open. The macaque monkey was totally shocked, because who was this invader in his laboratory? And he didn't move. He just gazed at this human trying to open up the nut, just like he had done a few seconds earlier. And then the scientist looked on the MRI brain scanner. The same exact neurons were lighting up when he observed the human being opening the nut as when the monkey opened the nut. And the scientists had not a clue as to what this was. They thought the MRI machine had broken. They then began to put MRI brain scanning machines on other primates, especially chimpanzees with our big neocortex. Then they went to humans, and what they found over and over again is something called mirror neurons. And that is that we are apparently soft-wired, some of the primates, all humans. We suspect elephants. We're not sure about dolphins and dogs. We've just begun. But all humans are soft-wired with mirror neurons, so that if I'm observing you, your anger, your frustration, your sense of rejection, your joy, whatever it is, and I can feel what you're doing, the same neurons will light up in me as if I'm having that experience myself. Now, this isn't all that unusual. We know if a spider goes up someone's arm and I'm observing it going up your arm, I'm going to get a creepy feeling. We take this for granted, but we are actually soft-wired to actually experience another's plight as if we are experiencing ourselves. But mirror neurons are just the beginning of a whole range of research going on in neuropsychology and brain research and in child development that suggests that we are actually soft-wired not for aggression and violence and self-interest and utilitarianism, that we are actually soft-wired for sociability, attachment, as John Bowlby might have said, affection, companionship, and that the first drive is the drive to actually belong. It's an empathic drive.
I really like that video. I hope that you appreciated the values in that video. So what happens, day in and day out as we're experiencing things with others? It's the way that we develop our empathy. It's the way that we relate to others. And I was doing my own research about this because I thought, now what if we are on the phone with someone, Or what if we can't see? How does that work? How can we experience the mirror neurons in the way that was described on the screen? And actually, if our other senses are involved, okay? So when I say, hey, you don't have to see me, but when I say, hey, like that, it's very warm, it's inviting, it's like, hi, nice to see you. But when I say, hey, or hey, you might think, I'm not happy to see you. Or you might interpret that as I'm not doing well. And it's complex. It's not as simple as, oh, it's a creepy feeling up my arm when I see a spider. It's also our other senses in action. So when you're talking to people on the phone, you're picking up on other cues. You're picking up to cadence. You're picking up to how loud someone's talking. You're picking up as to the emphasis, and you're picking up as to the lilt in their voice versus flatness of their voice, which words they're using. All of that, it's going on. Our brains are these wild computers. I love it, right? So, so I just wanted to add that piece, because as we're working remotely, it sometimes feels like nothing anyone's saying applies anymore. And everything does apply. It just applies differently. It just applies differently. Let's jump in a little more about what is secondary trauma, what is vicarious trauma. We hear these terms, they're often used interchangeably. And just to clarify, and Figley is this guy who is like the guy on secondary trauma and vicarious trauma. And so if you're interested in his works, I could probably get you some resources from him. I list some resources and references in the back of my outline, by the way, but if his isn't there, I could get it for you. But he defines it as the difference between secondary trauma and vicarious trauma is that secondary trauma can happen suddenly in one session, while vicarious trauma is a response to an accumulation of exposure to the pain of others. So if you typically don't hear about traumatic events and one time you hear it, that is secondary trauma. If you're exposed to it, you're uncomfortable that day, you're uncomfortable because of what happened to that person. But if over time you have a series of things that you listen to, say you're a personal injury lawyer and you're constantly hearing about people's accidents and injuries, you're being exposed and you're breathing that in and your body is reacting. And remember, we're chemical soup. So as their stress levels going up, your stress level might be going up as well. And you are using the parts of your brain and body that are necessary to process, but you're also using the parts of your brain that are necessary to protect yourself, because that fight or flight system is put in place to protect. And so when we're constantly in protection mode, it can be exhausting, right? I mean, you can't be a guard all night long. You have to rest. You have to rest. So the other term that we hear a lot is burnout. And burnout is that feeling of being worn out, wanting to be disengaged, actually being disengaged. And partly it can come from working in an environment where there is trauma, that you are exposed to other people's trauma, but it also could be in working in an environment where there seems to be inadequate resources. Now, some of you might have felt like your workplaces were very adequate, and now you're working from home, and I'm sitting here on my iPad, and it works, but it's certainly not as glorious as my lovely computer at work, right? That's just a tiny inadequate resource. Some of you might work in places like legal aid offices that are underfunded. And over time, when you feel like you can't get the work done, there isn't sufficient amount of either equipment or staff, that can also lead to burnout. And it's important to think about all of those things in context. And sometimes in the end, whether we're burnt out or whether we're experiencing trauma of other people, in the end, the feelings that we have might look very similar, and the ways to take care of ourselves might be very similar. So we can get hung up on the words, but in the end, the most important parts of my talk and the most important things that you need to get out of this is, how do I take care of myself? How do I take care of myself while I'm working remotely, but how do I take care of myself in the long haul? And so, you know, just to remind you of what the symptoms are, and if some of you are experiencing symptoms of burnout or are exposed to trauma a lot, I do recommend that you call the New Jersey Lawyer Assistance Program, and they can help you, and they can also give you referrals for other forms of assistance if you need it. In our state, we are seeing people experience lots of different versions of this all the time, and I'm sure Nancy and Noreen can tell you about that. But the physical symptoms can occur in you if you're experiencing burnout or vicarious trauma, and they are fatigue, lack of energy. You could feel physical stuff like headaches and backaches, maybe insomnia, other physical symptoms. Perhaps you're having trouble focusing. Concentration becomes an issue for some people. Starting tasks, completing tasks. Your short-term memory might be a problem. You might find that your self-confidence is dropping when you're typically wearing that cape and going into work and taking the world by fire, and all of a sudden you're just not feeling it anymore. Changes to your mood. And, you know, if you're not an irritable person typically, I would say that if you find yourself getting irritable, that it could be hunger, you're not eating enough, because that's another thing that can happen. But it could be a sign that you are burning out. If you're having a lot of mood swings, and that's not your typical. If you're starting to be depressed when you've never been diagnosed with depression, I would say check it out. It could be situational, it could be burnout. I can't diagnose you from afar. I don't want to, but it's worth checking out. If you're finding yourself having a harder time getting out of bed to do your tasks, it simply could be that this change and the anxiety around not knowing what's going to happen could be imposing this on you. But it could be a sign of burnout or vicarious trauma as well. And, you know, if it's leading to hopelessness and suicidal thoughts, you really owe it to yourself to talk to somebody and talk to someone who is a professional. And I do recommend you call the Lawyer Assistance Program. I am not just an advertisement for the New Jersey Lawyer Assistance Program, but I care deeply about people getting the help that they need. Okay, you know, a couple of other signs could be that instead of feeling a ton of emotions, you start to feel numb. And when I said fight, flight, freeze, or shutdown, that's the shutdown. If we are overexposed to trauma or other people's trauma, a really natural reaction is to stop feeling. So, because we just can't take it anymore. And sometimes when we use substances to numb out, and sometimes we are numbing ourselves out with the internet, and sometimes our body is shutting down. And it's, you know, worth checking in with yourself and getting the help that you need. The other part of this is, as the helper, as you might have gathered by all this talk that I'm giving you, as the helper, your threshold for your defense system kicking in starts to get lowered, and that means you start to become hyper aroused. So if you see someone frowning over time, you might think that that person is angry as opposed to sad, because your threat assess system is now online and you are a little more hypervigilant, you are looking for perceived threat as opposed to living in your empathy like you might normally or typically. And so it just makes it harder for the helpers to help when they are tending towards vicarious trauma and burnout. There is good news, and there's a lot of good news. And the good news has to do with the fact that we can help ourselves. And the good news has to do with the fact that there's outside help when we can't help ourselves. And the other good news is when you hear an amazing story, a victorious story, or when you read them, or when you hear about people doing acts of kindness, you also vicariously feel better. And by simply reading or listening. This week at the Lawyer Assistance Program in Oregon, we asked people to submit acts of kindness. We challenged them to do acts of kindness and asked them to submit them. And then on my blog post for today, in the Oregon Attorney Assistance Program's website, we have a blog, which you're welcome to subscribe to. But inside of that, we found a whole bunch of acts of kindnesses that I was able to put in the blog post. And when I was reading all of them, I got that warm feeling. I felt so much better. And, you know, it inspired me. It inspired me. And the same goes for when you hear about people's triumphs. So many times when we're working with clients that have had exposed to trauma, they also are here in front of you. They've lived through it. And there's resiliencies involved in that. And when we listen to their stories and how they made it through whatever that hard time was, it empowers us. It empowers them. And you see their back get straighter and you hear their tone change. And that can be very inspiring. And I just, I wanted you to know that it's not all doom and gloom. I want to switch gears a little bit because I've laid out this for you, and I want to talk about how to take care of our clients a little bit better, how to take care of ourselves a little bit better, and how to take care of our colleagues and others a little bit better during times of their stressors and during times of ours. And I think that many of you might be hearing about trauma-informed lawyering and trauma-informed services. And I'm pleased that that has become a national issue. And in fact, on the SAMHSA website, which is a national website on health, you can find a whole bunch of ways to be trauma-informed and what does that look like. I'm going to hit upon some of this today. I've included the link to their website for you. There's a lot of trainings out there that you can get live or you can get on the web, as it were, especially today. But today, some of you are still working and you are dealing with your clients who might be traumatized. So some of this will apply on the phone or on a Zoom meeting, and some of it will apply when you're sitting across from somebody. So it applies in both ways. So trauma-informed lawyering is a way for you to make your clients more comfortable and a way for you to keep yourself more comfortable as you're working with people who have experienced and been exposed to either one or more distressing events. And it is your goal as a lawyer to understand their story. And so you sort of have no choice. You have to listen, okay? And sometimes maybe that's not why the client is there. Maybe the client is there for another reason, but somehow this traumatic piece is incorporated into what they need to tell you, and you still need to listen to it. And so as you're learning that somebody's situation is traumatic, there are things you can do, but also thinking about setting up the conversation to be comfortable for that person. And so one thing that you can do to set it up is to make sure, now if you are on the phone or on Zoom, to remember that they can see you, they can hear you, and that we want to be composed in a way that is not staring mercilessly at the person, but that our own gaze is relaxed. We want to make sure that our posture, if we lean forward, is not too much in their face if we're on Zoom, and it is not too far back as if we're afraid of them, so that our posture is such that appears to be engaging. And if we are on the phone, that we are conscious of our tone, and we are conscious of how loud we are and how soft we are. And soft speaking has its place. We don't want to talk so softly that people can't hear us. But we want to be mindful of ourselves. It's also protective of ourselves, because as we are conscious, we are also protecting ourselves. We want to, if we are in an office setting, we want to make it so the scene is set up so that the client doesn't feel trapped, and so that you don't look like you're completely disengaged. And so you don't want to have a screen in front of you when you're meeting with somebody. You want to have the person in front of you. And often in counselors' offices, you're not sitting behind a desk. Often in lawyer offices, you are sitting behind a desk. But you might want to think about rearranging things if you're meeting with clients so that you're not behind this huge barrier, which is your desk. We want to talk to the client, whether it's in person, Zoom, or phone. And if we know for a fact we're going to be getting into a conversation that is painful for them potentially, then we want to say to them, do you have water? Do you need anything to get comfortable before we get started? I know that we're gonna talk about something that might be challenging. I'm going to insist that we take breaks during our conversation. I'll tell you, those breaks can be good for you too. If somebody's gonna tell you a long tale that is hard, maybe 20 minutes into it, maybe half an hour, you gauge it. You take a break, you put yourself on mute, you run and get a glass of water, do whatever you need to do, let them take a break, come back. You want to talk to your client also about what the relationship should be. When people have been traumatized, they might be experiencing powerlessness. And so you might talk to them about the agreement you have with them, and talk to them about it being a partnership of some sort. Talk to them about the fact that this is my end of what I will be doing for you, and here's my expectations of you as a client. I think it's good to have the four corners, the document of your contract with your client. I also think it's good to verbalize that with clients and make the expectations more realistic. Some clients are so desperate, they think you're going to be their saviors. You are not here to be anybody's savior. I'm not even here to be anybody's savior. Oh God, no. But I want you to remind yourself of the limitations of your roles as a lawyer, and to have some resources available to you in case your clients need more than what you can give. Family lawyers, you know what I'm talking about, immigration lawyers, criminal defense lawyers. But for the rest of you that maybe you don't always encounter clients that are impaired, it's for you too. When you do encounter a client who is having a hard time, you want to set it up for them that they realize the limitations of your representation. That will help you. That will help you not get into hero mode. That will keep you grounded as a lawyer, and refer them out to experts who can help them with their emotional piece. Okay. And, while you're in the room with your clients and it's getting intense, you could take a moment to ground yourself, and simply by planting your feet on the floor, wiggling your toes, pausing, do a quick body scan, relax for a second, and then continue your conversation so that you can bring yourself back to stasis, bring yourself back to relaxation if you're starting to get stressed out. Okay. The other piece that could be important in developing well-being in this situation for your clients is to understand that you have compassion for them, you have empathy for them, and it's okay to say that out loud. I'm going to move into taking care of ourselves. I think that that's why many of you are here. And I want to refer you to the self-care inventory I gave you, just as a reminder that it has a nice checklist of different ways you can take care of yourself. And I also want to talk for a moment about the dimensions of well-being. So to create overall emotional well-being, which is your theme for today, I think what you need to remember is that emotional well-being is not a static state. It's not like, yay, I've reached well-being, I have won. It's more like an ongoing process of taking care of ourselves in the different dimensions that we need to take care of ourselves in. Now, when we're taking care of a child or our dogs, we pay attention to different dimensions of well-being. It's not just feeding them. It's not just clothing them. For my dogs, I have cute little coats for the rain. Yeah, it rains here in Oregon. It's not just making sure that they're safe with a roof over their head, right? And so when we're, taking care of ourselves, there's a lot more to it than the obvious. And so, just to mention the dimensions that we're talking about, we say there are 7. There's occupational, which is cultivating personal satisfaction and growth and enrichment from your work. And, that bleeds into the intellectual, and intellectual well-being is, the continuous pursuit of learning, and being creative is part of that. And I would add that many of these are so connected to each other, it doesn't really matter what you call them, but all 7 of these dimensions are things you can check in with yourself on, okay? And tend to. Emotional well-being, we're talking about a part of that today, and that's recognizing the importance of emotions and not just making them go away, which a lot of us as lawyers, we just want to make our emotions go away. Emotions are not bad. Emotions are our light up system to tell us when something feels good. They're our system to tell us when something is scary. They're our system to tell us when something is just not right. It's our system to tell us when an injustice has happened, because we get angry. That's okay. Emotions are okay. Managing our emotions, that is something that can be challenging sometimes. But checking in on our emotional health is important. Our physical health, many of you, I know for me, I no longer have my gym or my bike commute to work. So finding ways to be physically healthy during this time has been interesting. For some people, it's been easy, and for other people, it isn't. How many people are 7 steps or less from the refrigerator, for example? I know I am often during the day. But my physical challenge to myself was to do a Couch to 5K program, and I'm finishing week 7 of that. So that's pretty good. Many of you have found yoga or other things online that you are doing to enhance your ability to be well. Spiritual well-being. Why would lawyers talk about spiritual well-being? Well, because it's important and it's evidence-based. We always prove what we already know, but you're lawyers, and lawyers like to have evidence. And the evidence says that if we are tapping into our spiritual side and finding meaning outside of the mundane, we will feel more satisfied with our life. So I challenge you to think about what spirituality means to you. Like for me, and for many people I know out here in Oregon, it means getting in nature. It means being amongst the trees. It means going to the mountains or going to the desert or going to the ocean and just standing there and looking at its vastness. Super important, super important. And then there's the social, and I'm sure that people have been challenged by that one today. My goodness. How many Zoom parties have you been having? And then Zoom all of a sudden, which was novel at first, gets old. It gets old. We're distracted by seeing images of ourselves. It's awful. We're distracted by not being able to sit in the same room as people. As the weather's getting nicer, and you might not be having as nice of a day there as here. I checked. Trenton didn't look so hot for today. But people are social distance walking, social distance picnicking, whatever you're doing to have contact with people. It's satisfying, but it's not the same as giving hugs. It's not the same. So I know that we're being challenged there. And with these dimensions of well-being, something you can think about is, if I can't really tap into one of those dimensions as well today, maybe there are others I can tap into better. Like, maybe I can't go to the forest today, but certainly I can call a friend and get some emotional support, get some social time as well. So those are super important for you to consider. And I think of them as checklists. I think of just remembering that those dimensions exist and saying, how am I doing? If you asked yourself how you were doing each day, and then thought of one thing you can do to improve that day, you're doing better than a lot of people are. And so that's a good challenge for you, that I offer. And, if you have the days when you just want to take a sick day or check out, that's also a way of taking care of yourself sometimes. So another thing that's happening for people is the lack of control feelings we're having, and self-efficacy is one way of looking at it, but trying to find the things we can control. Those of you who know the Serenity Prayer, it's a good one. It mentions the ability to recognize the things that we can change and the things that we can't, and finding the strength to make changes in the things that we can. But I'm just taking it more down to, what are things that I can do something about today? And I think that today there's always something we can do, whether it's just doing the next thing in our caseload, or whether it's taking a shower today. Woohoo! I am actually wearing a dress so that I can present to you today, as opposed to the casual things that people are wearing during this time of working from home. So, that's a way of taking care. Another thing that you can think about is, what are my strengths? The resiliency piece that some of you might have heard. Where do I have strengths? And let's just say, well, when I went through a hard time before, the way I got through it partly was using my sense of humor. When's the last time you laughed? How am I going to get that back? What do I need to do to find my own humor? Because humor helps me get through. How can I laugh at this situation? Who can I talk to that is that friend? Talk about the mirror neurons. That we think each other is so funny that we should have a comedy show. Who is that person? Who is that person? Talk to that person, as opposed to some of the other support people you have. What other strengths might you have, and how can you use them today? And I'll tell you, if you need help, you recognize it and you ask for help, that's a strength in and of itself, especially because we all know that that's not your typical role. You're the helper, not the helpee. And so when you ask for help, it's amazing. When you are able to be vulnerable, it's powerful. It's very powerful. And another thing you can do, and I focused on this a lot in a sidebar TED talk I gave, it was like a TEDx talk. I talked about showing up with passion. Another thing you can do is cultivate your zest for life or passion, and it will ignite other people, and it will help you keep your own flame going. And what I mean by that, and this comes from the Berkeley Center for Positive Psychology, where the positive psychologists are a group of people who study strength-based psychology. So as opposed to pathologizing someone who comes in their door, they're looking for the positives in people. They're looking for the strengths. And one of the things that they found when they did a survey of people is that people who had a zest for life were people who were happier. And so cultivating zest is something you can actually do. It's in my materials. I'm just going to give you some of the high points of that. And what I mean by zest, and I use the word zest and passion interchangeably, is an intense emotion that compels action. And what I mean by zest is an appreciation of the beauty of things around you and the depth of things around you, and to not lose sight of that. As I'm talking to you, I can look out my window and I can see the beauty of the trees. And for me, of course, I've mentioned nature is important, and it just brings it back and it enhances me. Cultivating zest is something that you can do by, again, being social, practicing savoring, noticing, appreciating, cultivating optimism, and getting in nature. In the last 10 minutes, I'm going to skip a piece. I was going to talk more about resiliency today. It is in my outline for those of you following along. I think, I just want you to know that resiliency is also something that we can build upon. Resiliency is a way to bounce back. Resiliency is a way to endure. And in my outline, I talk about building resiliency. It sounds so redundant. All of the ways that we take care of our emotions, depending on the part of our emotions, are very similar. Socially, by connecting with others, debriefing hard times, by getting through the process without being alone, by hugging if you can, or petting your animals, because we're chemical soup, we can release oxytocin. So that's one way to get better. By having a better attitude, by dealing with our emotions and processing them, we can build upon our own resiliencies. But how do we help a colleague do the same? How do we help a colleague who is in need? And I think that many of us work in environments that are formal, and some of us work in casual environments. But if you work in a formal environment, it's harder. It's harder when you see a colleague who is not doing well. It's harder to approach them. And I would argue that approaching someone who you've worked with for years, even if you're not close friends, might be welcomed by the person if it's done in a way that is less threatening to that person. Assistance programs are here to help. and you can always brainstorm this with one of your lawyer assistance program staff. But when we think about how we live, we do not live in a vacuum, most of us. And if you are seeing a colleague struggling and you want them to get help, you might just want to take them aside in an environment that is private, in an environment that is safe. And nowadays that could be on the phone, it could be by Zoom. And you might just say to them, if you've noticed a change in that person, you might just say to them, I noticed a change. I'm happy to help you if there's something I can do. I have witnessed specific things that concern me. And I would say to you that listing out the things that you've observed, like maybe the person keeps being late. Maybe the person is not showing up. Maybe the person is not getting their work done. Maybe every time you try to reach the person, they're unavailable and you're supposed to be colleagues. Maybe the person has complained about their health and well-being. Sit down with them in using a gentle tone and using a reassuring tone that you are here if they need you and you're happy to help them figure out resources they need. We, in our field of assistance with lawyers, we do a lot of outreach to lawyers in my office, but we see a lot of lawyers that are just sitting at their desk, white knuckling it, meaning they're really not feeling well, but they feel like they can't let go. They feel like they have to show up each day without getting help. And sometimes as soon as we do the outreach and say, I'm here to help, they can then relax. Are they better? Not yet, but are they on the road to being better? Yes. And that is something you can do for a colleague. You can help a colleague get on the road to being better. And, you know, suicidality is something that deserves more than a footnote. It was not the focus of my topic today, but there's a really easy training you can get called QPR, and it's listed in my materials. But if somebody is talking about suicide or even hinting at it, you can question them. You can see if they have a plan. It won't make it worse. But if they do have a plan, persuading them that they are valuable, persuading them to get help, and referring them could be really important. Lastly, as you can imagine, I really believe that everybody has a little bit of power to make themselves better. And if you're feeling stuck, please don't hesitate to ask for help. And that's what I have. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you, Shari. There is a question that popped up a while ago, which goes back to some of the symptoms that you were talking about. And the question is this: is numbing or not caring anymore, which is one of the symptoms you talked about, a healthy response? Like if you're that
Yes. Sorry, Nance.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, it's the Zoom thing. So I appreciate that question. I think that there is a place for healthy distancing, not just social distancing for the breath part of this with this COVID era, but there is a place for us to not be taking in people's emotions. And that is what our body does after a while. But if that is carried on into the rest of our life and we can no longer experience joy, we can no longer experience the subtleties of life that make life feel rich, then that is the sign that it is burnout. So it is not unhealthy in and of itself, but it can lend itself towards us not feeling well ourselves.
Thank you. Any other questions? Not seeing anything come up. I do want to, I'm going to introduce Shane Scott in just one moment, who's going to, There's one more question, very quickly. How do we get over burnout?
The ways we get over burnout are the similar ways that we can get through and get over vicarious trauma and secondary trauma. It is not an easy path. It is a path of learning to take care of ourselves. It could be on that path. It could be taking a break. It is, you know, all the stuff I was talking about self-care, are building blocks to get over burnout. Sometimes we need an actual break from what we are doing in order to do that. And sometimes we can't do that. So we're incrementally taking better care of ourselves, getting outside reinforcements, and then we can have building blocks in place using the self-care methods I talked about.
One of the things that I'm reminded of is just taking things one small step at a time, that sometimes we want to fix everything and have it be done with, and that it's really important to not set ourselves up for failure by having that attitude and that belief, but by doing one small thing differently every day, that adds up to a tremendous change that can eventually happen.
Exactly. It is exactly my point too.
Just as a quick reminder before I introduce Shane, in your email tomorrow, you'll be getting an email tomorrow from us for feedback about the seminar. Any feedback that you have is certainly welcome, and we like to know your opinions, your thoughts, any suggestions that you have. Also, in that email will be another link to Shari's material. So if you've disappeared the invitation for today that you've gotten with that link, you will be getting it again tomorrow. We've had a lovely way of closing out many of our programs this week with a guided meditation by Shane Scott. And Shane is a civil litigation attorney and of counsel with Chasan Lamparello Mallon Cappuzzo, focusing her practice on contracts, governmental entity representation, labor, and employment law. Shane is active in the New Jersey State Bar Association. She's a member of the Diversity Committee and is a member of the Executive Committee of the State Bar Labor and Employment Section. Additionally, she was one of 10 New Jersey lawyers selected by the association as a 2016-2017 Leadership Academy Fellow. Shane conducts anti-harassment and discrimination trainings for public entities. She has also presented seminars and written about the impact of unconscious bias in the workplace. She has also presented seminars and written about the importance of mindfulness and self-care for attorneys. Her article, Mindfulness, A Simpler Way to Alleviate Attorney Stress, was published in the July-August 2017 issue of the American Bar Association GP Solo magazine. And her article, The ABCs of Emotional Health, was published in the July 2019 issue of the New Jersey Lawyer magazine. And with that, I give you Shane. Thank you, Shane.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Shari, for your presentation. And really quick, wanted to talk about the burnout thing, because in 2016, I burned out. And I burned out unwillingly, because I know Shari mentioned you might want to take a break. I took an involuntary break because I had severe vertigo, stomach flu, and sinus infection simultaneously, to the point where I had to go to the ER, and I was on an IV while calling to make sure people could cover my court appearance the next day. So I've experienced burnout, and I couldn't even go back to work for a week. And what I learned from that process, what I discovered, was that mindfulness really was the cure for me. It's not the end all be all, but it actually helped me take agency for my choices. And I had felt very trapped, quote unquote trapped, up until that point. But then I started to really recognize the choices I was making about what I was thinking and what I was feeling. And now I do probably twice as much of the work that I did back in 2016, but I've managed my mind, and meditation has been a good tool to do that. So with that being said, if you would like to meditate with me, sit up in your chair, feet on the floor, hands in your lap. And what we're going to do is we're going to take some deep breaths in through the nose and exhale through the mouth. But when you inhale through your nose, I want you to visualize a bright light. So, bright light coming in. And then when you exhale, we're going to sigh it out, and just imagine like all the negativity, all the stress, all the anxiety coming out with your exhale in like a big black smoke. So if you can't visualize, it's fine. Just inhale and exhale, but it's an exercise to kind of help you visualize that. So big inhale through the nose, visualize light surrounding you, and exhale through the mouth. And just visualize all that stress and anxiety and all the negativity come out like a big billow of smoke. Big inhale in through the nose. Sigh it out. Through the nose. Sigh it out. Inhale. Sigh it out. Inhale. Sigh it out. Now just let your breath go to normal. Inhaling through the nose and out through the nose. And just noticing how you feel right now. Notice your body on the chair or on the couch or wherever you are. And just give yourself permission to relax right now. And we're just going to relax our feet with our next exhale. Our ankles, legs, knees, thighs with the next exhale. Our hips, lower back, lower belly. Relaxing our solar plexus and middle of our back. Our chest and upper back. Our fingertips, our hands, wrists. Arms, elbows. Shoulders, with all that tension, just let it go. Throat, relax. Your facial muscles, your jaw, the back of your head. The top of your head, relax. And just taking a moment to scan your body. And if you notice any tension, just tell your body to relax. Just taking a few breaths. Just noticing how it feels to have control over how you feel right now. That regardless of what's going on in the world, you can be relaxed right now. And you can be relaxed anytime you choose. Just a few more breaths. And getting ready to end the meditation. You're going to take one more deep breath in, breathing in the light, and sighing out all the negativity. Now open your eyes. And thank you very much. I meditate like this just about every night. And if you want to get more information, you can find me on spirituallitigator.com. I spend a lot of time on Instagram, Spiritual Litigator. Thank you very much. And Nancy, I think you're going to close this out.
I am. I do want to thank you very much. I feel both relaxed and exhilarated all at the same time between the two of you today. So thank you for that. That's certainly a gift. Thank everybody who has helped put this week together. Thank everybody who has shown up for this week. And I wasn't sure why I came across this quote this morning, but it seems appropriate to share with you now as a way to close out today. And it's a Navajo saying, "Bless those who challenge us to grow, to stretch, to move beyond the knowable, to come back home to our elemental and essential nature. Bless those who challenge us, for they remind us of doors we have closed and doors we have yet to open." Have a lovely day, everyone, and thank you for being here. Bye.